Hello, all. Welcome back to my fragrance journey. My name is Ron, and I'm back with another review video. Today, I wanted to share one of my favorite perfumes. This is potentially even my favorite. It's hard to ever really pick just one. And for myself, so much is dependent upon mood and the day I'm having or think I'm going to have or want to have. So it can vary, but when I do wear this, even if it isn't all the time, it is something that just makes me so happy. It is something that brings about a lot of good feeling, a lot of comfort. Um, and yeah, it's just a wonderful fragrance. So this is Youth Dew by Estee Lauder. And I'll hold up a little bit as I tend to do to kind of show you. There we go. There's a decent angle. You can kind of see the label. It's quite pretty when it hits the light. This amber concoction. And this is, again, Youth Dew by Estee Lauder. This is a very iconic fragrance. I know we, myself very much included, throw the term iconic, legendary, those sorts of things around quite easily. And I do love it. I mean, I love a bit of a dramatic flair, even if something doesn't perhaps exactly warrant it. But in this case, I think it is very apt, very fitting to call this iconic and legendary. This is a fragrance that launched in 1953. So we think about we are now in 2025. Um, the fact that this fragrance is, I mean, yeah, it's been around for a very long time. It's far as I understand, never been out of production. It's never gone and come back or anything. It's continued to exist all through those many years, and it's been much beloved all through those many years, and I'm sure that's why it's still around. This is a fragrance that also has quite a, again, legendary or iconic start. It also, in some ways, is a bit of a empowering, or perhaps some might even view it as a feminist fragrance, at least perhaps in history. I don't know about all of that, because it, like most things, it's still wrapped up in a bit of capitalism, right? It's about money making at the end of the day. The history that this fragrance has is quite fun and interesting, and I do think the story is wonderful, but at the same time, there's no escaping that at the end of the day, Estee Lauder was trying to build an empire and trying to build a very successful company, of which that all has come true, that all has come to uh, reality, come to fruition. So it was successful in that endeavor. She was very successful in those endeavors. But yes, again, getting back to this fragrance, the story though, yeah, has some empowering touches, and I think it's really a great one. And so to start, before I get into notes, before I get into how I personally feel or anything like that, I will go over some of the interesting kind of history of this fragrance. I by no means am I a historian. No, by no means am I an expert. By no means have I done extensive research. A lot of this actually comes from Estee herself. A few years back, before I bought this fragrance, and what was ultimately the catalyst for me purchasing this fragrance, I had read a couple books that spurned this desire to own this fragrance. One, the first being, I purchased Pretty Honest by Sali Hughes, and I'll have everything again listed below that I mention in case you'd like to look into it. But I had purchased Pretty Honest by Sali Hughes. Sali Hughes is a very popular, a very respected, and a very, just in my opinion, wonderful beauty journalist. She's in the UK. And she's also done other things. She does some content creation. She's here on the social medias and things. You can definitely find her. But she also is an author. And she's done a couple books now. And one of them is called Pretty Iconic. There's that word again. And she, too, in that book, doesn't use the term lightly. It's all about basically really almost a love letter to the iconic and long-standing, some of which have gone, but really just impactful products and tools within the beauty space that have, appeared and maybe disappeared, or are still remaining. And so Youth Dew is one of those. She has a section devoted to it where she discusses the fragrance. She mentions some of its the dinner party type stories that one might pass around about this fragrance. I'm sure Estee did, and so it mentions some of that, and that intrigued me. And then I ended up, after reading that book, I read Estee Lauder's own autobiography. Again, I'll list that below. And she herself, mentions Youth Dew and also kind of, how it came to be and everything. And hearing that or reading that story straight from her was incredibly interesting, incredibly fascinating. And if you're someone like me who really loves not just perfume, but makeup, beauty, hair, skincare, all of the whole, world, and especially the history and how things have gotten to where they are, where they've come from, I think that you'd find that book very interesting, especially as we know that Estee Lauder is a very, at these days, I mean, it's an empire, truly. There's very little in the beauty world that Estee Lauder isn't some way related to. But again, it mentions Youth Dew in that book. And so, yeah, I will also take this time to then mention some of those stories about it. I'm no great shakes at history with these sort of things. I haven't prepared some big speech, clearly, by how I'm waffling. So, take it all with a grain of salt. I'm very much paraphrasing. I'm very much just going off the cuff here and what I remember reading. Some of it may not be 100% accurate. But yeah, definitely check out those other resources if you're curious about the story. So the first big thing with Youth Dew is that at the time that this came out, again, this 1953, it wasn't as I always say, it wasn't a done thing. It wasn't the thing to do for a woman to purchase her own fragrances. I'm sure in some cases it did happen, but the way Estee wrote it, it wasn't really common, and it was kind of seen as a bit I guess perhaps, yeah, it just wasn't done. It wasn't seen as the thing to do, because ideally your the man in your life was buying these fragrances that you wanted. So if you wanted a perfume, or if you liked perfume, or if your husband liked perfume and wanted you to wear it, he would be the one purchasing it for you, or your boyfriend, your fiance, your beau, they would be purchasing it for you. And so you were kind of up to their mercy on whether or not you got it, whether, and I'm sure even if it was a fragrance that you wanted, right? I'm sure there were many times where they just went into a department store, talked to the sales associate, and then sometimes you ended up with a fragrance that you just had to get used to. So at that time, with that being the case, and then also, from what I understand, when you even did have a fragrance, it wasn't something that a lot of women were wearing regularly, especially because you weren't buying it. Your husband had to buy it. Somebody else had to buy it. Often, just like today, fragrances can be expensive. So, you were saving it for special occasions, as people still do to this day. We save things. I try not to. I try to wear what I have when I feel the urge, because why not? Life's too short. But anyway, it wasn't as much it wasn't in vogue to necessarily buy and or wear things so liberally like that in 1953. So Estee, being, again, perhaps something of a feminist, but also very, very much a savvy businesswoman, wanted to take advantage of this, wanted to change that status quo, shake things up a bit, and wanted to give women the chance to buy their own fragrances, because Estee's whole business was really about marketing things to women, by a woman for women. It wasn't about appealing to men to buy these things for women. So she wanted to do that with fragrance. And so she knew, though, that she couldn't just come out with a straight perfume and have it be bought, even if she wanted that to be the case. So her loophole was to create a bath oil. So, a scented oil a perfumed oil that you would, splash into your bath, and it would perfume the water, perfume your skin, perfume the bathroom. And she knew that that was something that women could buy for themselves and that she could encourage women to buy, and it wouldn't have been seen as improper. It wouldn't have been seen as something that a woman should perhaps always consult or request from the man in her life. She could go out and buy it on her own if she wanted to. So that's what she came up with, was a bath oil. That's also the version I have here, not the perfume spray. And so with that, though, she also had to, again, not just come up with the idea, but she had to get it sold, right? And Estee Lauder was a brand, as it is today, is sold in many department stores and things like that across the globe. And so in getting any of her new products shelved and stocked back in the day, she had to kind of go around and campaign and talk to buyers and things like that. Well, the big story with all of this leads up to one department store. I can't remember the name, but one department store, I don't believe they're still in business, but she'd met with the buyer, and they weren't interested in stocking Youth Dew. I can't remember if it was just down to it being, they knew what she was up to, or if they just didn't think it would be as popular as her other products, or what have you. For whatever reason, they decided they didn't want to stock Youth Dew. So she, quote unquote, accepted that, understood, okay, you're not going to stock it. And as she was leaving, she accidentally, or as it seems to be the case, accidentally on purpose, dropped a bottle of Youth Dew, which hit the carpet, hit the floor, soaked into the carpeting, and again, was an oil, so a very lasting and powerful version of the fragrance, and yeah, soaked right in. And oops, so sorry, didn't mean to. Shame, shame. Please forgive me, and scurried out the door. Well, the women who went to this department store, because they were out on the sales floor when this happened, they of course smelled this lovely fragrance and wanted to know what it was and could they buy it and where could they buy it, or obviously I'm assuming if they thought it was a perfume, could their husbands buy it, that sort of thing. And they all had to be informed, unfortunately, no, it's not a fragrance we stock. It's, we don't carry this, or it's from Estee Lauder, but we didn't buy, whatever they told the customers, they weren't carrying this. Well, sure enough, they were inquired, or seemingly, from the way Estee tells it, somewhat badgered enough by their clientele to ring up Estee and say, we'd love to carry that, actually, and we would definitely want to stock that in our stores, and they did. And so that's kind of a truly iconic story of not only how she came about being able to market this and sell this to women, but also how she kind of muscled it in when doors were sometimes closed. And that's just a testament, again, to the sort of business person that Estee was. Whether or not you love her or the company, it's a pretty interesting and I think inspiring story. So, that all said, what is this fragrance? What do I think of it? What's going on? Well, this is, again, a fragrance from 1953. And I think it smells like a fragrance of 1953. And I don't say that in a negative light at all. If you've seen any of my previous videos, especially my first haul that I did just a couple days ago, you'll know that I am a fan of older fragrances, vintage fragrances, retro fragrances, or as I even mentioned at that in my first video, as people like to call them, grandmother or old lady fragrances. I mean, I think that one's a bit rude, but because it's usually not said very kindly. Um, but yeah, look, I always say I wear what I want when I want. And I often want older style fragrances, mostly because they are different. They are not the status quo. They aren't what you're going to find in all the shops out on display at the top of the shelf or right on the counter in a department store. They aren't when you go to a dedicated perfume shop, what you're going to see right on the counter. Unless perhaps they're a more modern classic, right? Thinking something from perhaps the 90s or something, a Le Male from Jean Paul Gaultier or something to that effect. But for the most part, definitely something from 1953. You're not going to always find that being displayed so proudly and so prominently. And it's not thus going to be something that's worn very much. This type of fragrance, this scent is not something that is popular these days. And I always tend to be somebody who is a bit counterculture sometimes. Sometimes I'm drawn to perhaps an underdog. Not that I would say this is a underdog in that sense fully, but again, this isn't maybe the hot new thing to spray or apply. So, um, that intrigues me. That's something when I hear that about a fragrance, when I hear, oh, this has been around for eons and nobody talks about it anymore, or it was once a icon and a legend and perhaps still is historically, but it's no longer the hot thing to get. I'm intrigued. I want to check that out. I want to smell that because one, I just typically do like those fragrances. It's not even about being different, 100%. I also just legitimately think these are good smelling fragrances. I legitimately enjoy wearing them. And Youth Dew is, again, kind of near the top of the top for me um, because it's just so good. Actually, this was my second really sort of classic fragrance that I got into. The first one is Aromatics Elixir, which is by Clinique and which is also owned by Estee Lauder. But this was one that really sealed the deal because that you get one, okay, maybe that's a one-off situation. You get two of something, and we start to form a habit. And Used to definitely was the confirmation of such a habit for myself. I love it. It is described as an amber, spicy fragrance. And I kind of bounced back and forth between Fragrantica and the Estee Lauder website because, again, as I mentioned in my last video, notes and things are one half truth, one half marketing, right? It's what the brand wants you to take away from the fragrance. It's what they want you to pick up on the fragrance. And it can be true, and it can also be sometimes not necessarily a lie, but as things are, are formulated and mixed and all of that, sometimes it's not as straightforward as it might seem. And so, especially when looking at the notes from a house or a brand, and then you might look at Fragrantica or different forums, you'll see some differentiation perhaps. And I don't actually think one is more correct necessarily than the other. But I won't go back on that soapbox again. All that to say, I will read everything from Estee Lauder just simply because they don't list nearly as many notes as Fragrantica does, and it's quite a few. I think that Fragrantica probably is a bit more on the nose with some of it, but again, we'll go off of what Estee Lauder themselves say. So they describe it again as an amber, spicy fragrance, and I do think that's very apt. And this is says it has top notes of rose, jonquil, and lavender. It also says that it has middle notes of jasmine. And this one, I didn't look up the pronunciation. It's something I've seen before, and I've never known how to say this. And not that I'm any great shakes at pronunciation with anything. I like to give things a college try, but on this case, I am a little unprepared. I don't know how to say it. So there's jasmine, and then there's Mugwet, Mugwe, Mujwe, Mugwit. I don't know. I I will again list the fragrance below, and maybe I'll list the notes on this one as well, since it's the only thing I'm talking about. Maybe I'll start doing that with these reviews, but or at the very least, you can look it up on Estee Lauder's website or Fragrantica, and yeah. That's that. That's what it's got. And then there's also in the middle spices. And then for the base, we have moss, vetiver, and patchouli. Now, this fragrance. Now, I will say, even though I just read these off of Estee Lauder, again, Youth Dew on Fragrantica has a whole slew of notes listed. And again, I think that's probably a bit more correct. But of course, as formulations and things change, again, maybe they're highlighting or using more of other things in this modern formulation. My bottle is from I purchased it in 2019 directly from Estee Lauder. So it's a more modern formulation to be sure. But one thing they don't really list on the Estee Lauder site that they list on Fragrantica is aldehydes in the top. And I absolutely do get aldehydes. I get aldehydes, I get the spices, and I also just get a strong incense note. And when I say incense, kind of, the patchouli is in there, the moss is in there, there's a little musk, that sort of thing. But it's all sort of, to me, the amber, it's all to me not as overly distinct in those base notes. They kind of just blend, and it just comes off as an overall incense vibe, even though those are, I'm sure, more distinct notes in the formulation, and incense can also be its own sort of accord. But that's what it all blends to my nose. It's spices, it's aldehydes, and it is incense. And I'm also pulling my phone here because I did once do a little kind of brief review highlight of this on Instagram, and I'm just also checking what I've said there so I don't really forget things. But one thing I did note in that, and I will note here, if you do go look at Fragrantica, they also list as a top note Coca-Cola. Now, I'm sure 1953, I doubt they were, pouring in bottles of Coca-Cola. However, I noted in my Instagram review of this, and I stand by this here, I believe that what they more, or where that comes from is because while I wouldn't say any of this is gourmand, I wouldn't say that this is photorealistic at all to Coca-Cola. And I wouldn't even say that overall, if you just, if you were to smell this, having never smelled it before, that you would come away saying, oh, it reminds me of a cola of any sort. But if you know what Coca-Cola kind of is, especially if you've had the original Coca-Cola, especially like a sugared version in a glass bottle, you know that there can be this really spiced quality to it a little bit, some warm spice. You know that there can also be a citrus quality to it, kind of a lemony citrus quality, at least to my taste buds and nose, which are all kind of connected. And so it's one of those things that I noted in the Instagram review, and I agree here. It's not wrong to say Coca-Cola. I mean, I wouldn't say that, again, Estee Lauder is gunning for that, or that they're going to advertise it as such, but or that, even in the background, that's what they were going for. But it's not, it's kind of, if you know to kind of think about that when you're smelling it, you can kind of pick up on how someone could have that takeaway, is what I'm getting at. But even still, it wasn't until I looked at that around the time that I did the Instagram review a few weeks ago or a month ago, that I ever had seen that. And I was like, oh, Coca-Cola. Well, they're not wrong. But it's also not something I would truly say is like a no. I wouldn't describe it to anybody and say, oh, it's going to remind you of Coca-Cola. It's kind of just an interesting thing that I'm highlighting that you might want to look for as you smell it. But it does not smell, again, gourmand. It does not smell juvenile in that, way. I mean, soda, I think, makes us think sometimes of being a kid and that sort of thing. And this doesn't evoke childhood necessarily. I mean, it might, as far as your scent memories, if people in your life wore this when you were younger. But I don't think it actually is a juvenile youth. It's called Youth Dew, but I don't think it's necessarily a youth filled fragrance. Not old lady, again, as someone might say. Again, they might describe it as such. I wouldn't say that. This is just in the best, most confident and sure of yourself way. This is a mature fragrance. This is a fragrance for somebody who definitely is not definitely is not afraid of a stronger scent, of a more bold scent. Especially this being the oil, you can really go quite light with this. But at the same time, the overall scent is still strong. It is still absolutely impactful. I wouldn't say it is overbearing. However, I imagine you could easily get there if you really apply quite liberally. I find, this being an oil, it's not a spray. Um, there's just a dabber. And I find that, I mean, so I'll actually demonstrate. I've got a little on the back of this hand because I was smelling it earlier just to kind of jog my thought process here. But see, I kind of dip my finger like that, and then that's what I'll apply in just a few sections. So I'll do maybe a few of those little dabs, maybe, you know, one to two on each wrist or my forearm, kind of in the crook of my elbow, and then one or two drops like that or dabs on my neck. And that is it. And I'm good for pretty much the entire day. I might reapply a bit later if it's an especially long day or if I want to kind of have this scent before I go to bed, because I do think there's enough warmth and comfort there that it is quite nice before bed. I could also see it being lovely. Again, this is a bath oil. I could see it being lovely applied after a bath, especially in the evening. I think that'd be quite relaxing and glorious. But yes, this is still a strong fragrance, though. I mean, I've had this again since 2019-ish, and you can see as people say, the dent I've made. It's not an especially large one because I truly am only using, not even an eighth of a teaspoon probably every time I use it. And I actually do wear it fairly, I wouldn't say, weekly or anything, but I would say especially in the cooler months when I tend to get the most wear out of this, the autumn and the winter, I probably wear this, few times every month, if not several times a month. And it's just so good. It really is. Again, if you like warmth, if you like spice, if you like incense, if you like something that can be a bit heady almost, but at the same time, definitely sophisticated, definitely, again, confident, definitely something, honestly, I described it, I believe, in my Instagram. I keep pointing here, my phone's here, where I was referencing my Instagram review, but in my Instagram review, I believe I mentioned that this just smells to me like you might imagine an Estee Lauder customer smelling like. Like if you think of a classic Estee Lauder customer, or even Estee herself, I know she had, or they had come out with Estee, the perfume as well. And that's named after her. I haven't actually ever smelled that. I've wanted to for a long time. But I've heard a lot of mixed emotions on that one and reformulations, which seems to kind of just be a running theme with Estee Lauder. But I imagine, up until that creation, I imagine this is what she wore. This is the type of thing that sort of, again, mature, confident, very pulled together, very classy, very sophisticated, very sure of herself. That kind of woman was, I think, who was in, mind for this fragrance. That's who I think is in mind as an Estee Lauder customer to this day, kind of their classic base of customers. And that is who I think this fragrance, this is who it emulates. I wouldn't say suited for. I mean, it definitely is, but at the same time, I think, again, anyone can wear anything. I am not probably the picture of an Estee Lauder customer as they would see it, but I love it. I think it's wonderful, and I think it's incredibly, again, just very comforting. Even again, for all of that power that it can pack, if you want to use it that way, it also is again quite comforting. Also, Estee Lauder, the site, I noticed they mentioned it as being very sexy. They mentioned sexy quite a few times. I would say it is sexy, and actually, I do think I also mentioned that in my review, but it is sexy in a very reserved and classy way. You know what I mean? It's not tawdry. It is not lady of the night, shall we say. Nothing wrong with any of that, but it's not that. This is a successful businesswoman who is who is she's sexy, but she's sexy again in a very understated, reserved way. Like when she's being sexy, that's because she's deciding to be sexy, kind of way. You're not sexualizing this woman. She's sexy because she decides she's sexy. That woman is wearing this, and yeah, I just tangent I went on, but I just think it's a wonderful fragrance, and I think it's one that I do think just for the longevity of it and for the history of it, everyone should try it, get a sample or something if you can at a counter or a Sephora or wherever else you might be able to. Actually, I don't know if Sephora stocks this one, but anyhow, you could do that. They do make this again in a spray version. I had the bath oil because, again, given the story and given the history, I really wanted to start out with this. I still want to try the perfume version, or the spray version of the perfume. I have heard some people say it's different. I've heard some people say it's not. I'm curious. I really actually want to get. You can get a bottle that's reminiscent. Estee Lauder still sells a bottle that's in like the really quite classic vintage packaging, or it's modeled after that, and it's very vintage. It's a very beautiful kind of powdery, almost Tiffany blue, turquoisey blue color. And I think it's really sweet looking. So I kind of want to get that one, but I also love the more current, classic long-standing bottle where it's kind of cinched. It's like this, but it's cinched in and there's a little gold bow. I think that's really pretty as well. I also just love the stately look of this bottle though too. But okay, I'm waffling. This is a half hour of Youth Dew. Oh my goodness. Well, there was some stories to tell, weren't there? So I will leave you and I will thank you for having watched and stuck around through this video if you have. And I thank everybody who's watched any of my other videos. Again, we're still just kind of in the beginning stages, as you can see, but I'm having a lot of fun doing this, and I think I'm going to continue. So that all being said, I thank you for joining me on my fragrance journey. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one.